Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to If Data Could Talk. My name is Andy Cotgreave, a technical evangelist at Tableau. And today we have one of my data heroes on the show. It's Tim Harford. Now, I'm a loyal listener to BBC Radio 4's More or Less, which is Tim's show, but he's also a columnist for the FT. He's an economist and the author of multiple books, including this one, How to Make the World Add Up, which came out in the UK in September. It's coming out in the US in February. Is that right, Tim?
That's right. Yes, it's going to be called The Data Detective in the US and Canada, and it's out in February 2021.
All right. But if you're in the UK and maybe other territories, you can already get it. So we're going to talk about this and all the themes in this book. And Tim, it's a really great honor to have you on the show today. How's things going today?
Oh, it's very kind of you to say. Yeah, it's good. It's good. I mean, book launches are always a bit of a roller coaster, but there have been a few highs as well as a few lows. So How to Make the World Add Up is on the business bestseller lists in the UK. So you can't complain about that.
Yeah, well, it's a great book. I finished it last week, so I recommend it to everybody watching. So Tim, I want to dig into some of the themes in the book, and I thought I'd start with a nice softball question. Are statistics tools or weapons?
Well, they are presented as being both. And the book actually begins by focusing on this moment in 1954 of all times and places. This moment in 1954 when the most popular book ever written about statistics was published, Darrell Huff's How to Lie with Statistics. It's also the year that two British epidemiologists, Austin Bradford Hill and Richard Doll, published some of the first compelling evidence that smoking cigarettes dramatically increases your risk of lung cancer. And the reason that the book's introduction contrasts these two things is because they are really presenting two different visions. Darrell Huff's book is great, it's funny, it's witty, it's insightful, but it's also very cynical about statistics. It's all about showing you, where the magician hides the rabbit before appearing to pull it out of his hat. It's all about showing you how the crooks will lie to you. Basically treats statistics as a weapon in a political fight or as a weapon for advertisers, for dishonest politicians. It's a trick not to be taken too seriously. And Doll and Hill show instead that could be an absolute lifesaver. Statistics can show us something we can't see in any other way. And I really wanted to confront people with that choice and to say, please treat statistics as a tool, not as a trick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got my copy, and I do remember when I first read it, I was like, really, this is a disservice to all of us, in statistics in the field of data visualization. So I really appreciate you, being such a leader and really calling out the problems with this. You actually talked about how he then went on to be a lobbyist for the tobacco industry. Is that right?
Yeah, he did. I mean, Darrell Huff was a journalist and not a statistician, although plenty of statisticians, I'm afraid, did the same thing and defended cigarettes, took money as consultants from big tobacco. But Huff was really the perfect front man for the tobacco industry, because he's very funny, very witty, and very good at spreading doubt. Very good at this sort of cynical, we've had enough of experts kind of thing. You can't trust anything, you can't trust anybody, you can't trust the numbers, lies, damn lies, and statistics. He was absolutely at the forefront of that message. And that made him a terrific person to get involved when the cigarettes companies wanted to, not to discredit, but to raise doubts about the epidemiology and the statistical evidence that cigarettes were so damaging.
If Dan Huff was trying to be manipulative about statistics, then is your book an attempt to redress the balance? Is that the motivation to try and give people a different way with statistics?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want people to do is to realize statistics can tell the truth. They can help us see facts about the world that we can't see in any other way. So that's my number one aim. But then the question is how, because I think people are skeptical for a reason. There are a lot of lies told with statistics, and I think people often feel rather helpless. They don't really understand how to make sense of the numbers that swirl around them. And so what I'm trying to do is to give people simple simple thinking tools, really, simple
Hmm.
rules of thumb, habits of mind, to adopt when they're trying to deal with the statistics all around them that will help them think more clearly. And a friend of mine, the mathematician Matt Parker, said, all right, so this is a book about how to think about statistics. And I thought for a second, and I thought, actually, no, Matt, it's not really a book about how to think about statistics. It's a book about how to think. It's a book about how to understand the world. But my argument is that statistics are a vital tool in trying to understand the world. There are certain things, there are lots of things that we can't possibly understand without using statistics to help us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you go through the book and look at these 10 rules, I think there's they break down into sort of data collection, data analysis, and data sharing. And for anybody who's watching, that's kind of the life of an analyst or somebody working with data in an organization. So let's talk about some of those collection rules. There's a great set of phrases in the book about counting sheep. Now, I have some probably very wet sheep right outside my window. How many sheep are in my field, Tim?
Oh, this is a wonderful question from my my colleague Michael Blastland, who was one of the creators of the program More or Less. So Michael wrote an essay. I think it was based on his book, The Hidden Half, which is a great book. Where he said, okay, look, two sheep in a field. It's pretty obvious, right? How many sheep? Two. And then he said, okay, but actually one of them is a lamb. Does that count as a sheep? Oh, and the other sheep is pregnant, actually heavily pregnant, actually giving birth right now. So was it one sheep, two sheep, three sheep? Counting to three just got difficult, he says. And I mean, that might seem like some sort of philosophical thought experiment designed to confuse us, but actually so often we engage in what I would call premature enumeration. So we're starting to count and then to analyze numbers before we really understand what it is that the numbers are describing. So you're trying to work out how many nurses work for the British National Health Service. Okay, fine, but let's just be clear. How do we define a nurse? What about contractors who are not employed by the NHS? Do they count? Two part-time nurses. Is that one full-time equivalent nurse, or is it two nurses? I mean, there are two people, but maybe it's only one nurse. I mean, it really depends what purpose you're gathering the data for. And you really need to understand what's going on. And so often I think this particularly affects people who are quite confident with numbers. We leap to the slicing and dicing and the chopping about of numbers and the plotting the graphs. And we've got ahead of ourselves because we don't actually understand what those numbers are referring to in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we're recording this in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic. And, we've seen this, how do you define a COVID-19 death or a COVID-19 case? That has been a challenge people have grappled with throughout this year.
Absolutely. And there's no, I mean, this gets us back to this question of statistics as weapons, because you very often see that lack of clarity over what a COVID-19 death is being weaponized to make a particular point. Whereas I think the honest analyst would say there are different ways to do this. They have strengths and weaknesses. And ideally, probably we try and measure COVID-19 deaths in more than one way and to see what that teaches us.
Yeah, I noticed Jake Berry, British MP, Northern English MP, was calling on the government to simplify the data presentation as a roadmap out of COVID-19 restrictions that we're experiencing in England. And he said on Today programme on Radio 4 yesterday that it would be great if we could have a church thermometer style representation to show when we're going to get out of this. And I thought, well, that would be great, but you can't reduce these things down to one number, right? I challenged him. I was like, what is the one number that would be the outcome? It's extremely difficult.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and you see, and again, people who are interested in trying to win an argument, you'll see them hopping around and saying, well, it's a case-edemic, not a, these are, there are cases, but they're not really COVID-19 cases. There's just more testing, and then when you start talking about deaths, they'll say, oh yeah, but they're not really, they died with COVID, not died of COVID. Sometimes people are really, extraordinarily insensitive in some ways. I quite early on in the pandemic, I wrote a short Twitter thread in memory of my economics teacher, Peter Sinclair, who had died after contracting COVID. And somebody said, "Oh, thanks very much for saying died with COVID rather than died of COVID. Very important to make this distinction." To which the answer is, a friend of mine just died, and you're up in my face trying to make some political point about this disease. So people, it's very easy for people to get carried away with the politics. And one of the points I make in the book is that if we're going to think clearly, we need to try to take the politics out of it, take the argument out of it, also try to take the emotion out of it, or at least to notice our emotional reaction to what's happening.
Yeah, so let's talk about emotional responses. I think, with the world of social media, divided political opinions, our emotional response to data has probably changed to what we might have seen 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. You sort of say, don't be a slave to data and check your emotional responses. Can you elaborate on the importance of that and how you do that in practice as well? Because I think it's important to go beyond theory to acting out these ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, the first chapter of the book actually begins with what I find is an incredible story about an art forgery, which has nothing whatsoever to do with statistics, I should be clear. But the forger manages to fool one of the great experts in art with what is quite a crude forgery. How does he manage to do that? Well, the art critic puts it in very well in his own words. He doesn't realize he's been fooled, but he writes this essay of appreciation about this fake Vermeer that he thinks is a real Vermeer. And one of the things he says is, when I saw this work, I had difficulty controlling my emotions. And of course, that's the problem. He saw it, he had difficulty controlling his emotions. And at that point, he stopped thinking clearly about what he was seeing. And the point that I wanted to make was, I can give you all the technical advice you like about, correlation is not causation, all that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, what we believe is very driven by what we want to believe. It's driven by our emotions, by our membership of particular political tribes, by what our friends think, by our preconceptions. And if I ignore that, if I give you a book about how to think about the world, about how to use statistics, but I act like emotions don't exist and preconceptions don't exist, well, I haven't really helped at all. And one of the things that I had to deal with it on, more or less, was to fact check the 2016 Brexit referendum in the UK, fact check the last two US presidential elections, and some pretty bitter general election campaigns, a Scottish independence referendum. And in all of these cases, emotions are running really high. And what you realize is, I can give you all the facts you like, but people are often not that interested in the facts. And some people are interested in the facts, but a lot of what people believe is nothing to do with the facts. It's what they want to believe. So I wanted to put that right on the table, right at the beginning of the book. And so that's why my advice is to notice your emotions. It's not go with your gut, not embrace your emotions, and not suppress your emotions, but just be mindful of the fact that you're looking at a number, you're looking at a claim, and you're having an emotional reaction to it. Maybe denial, maybe joy, jubilation, anger, but just sit with the emotion for a second, and then, having noticed that it's created those feelings in you, you may be able to think more clearly about what to do next.
Yeah, I really like that. I think of many of the things in the book, almost from a sort of a business analyst perspective, it's one of the ones I don't think we address in business at all, or we don't consciously think about. I think a lot of people are like, I see my data, I'm going to agree or disagree, but to what extent of people bringing their preconceived notions into their business decisions? So I really like that aspect. I also noticed, Twitter in the run up to the US election, they changed the way retweets work. If you retweet something, they give you the quote retweet option first, rather than just retweet and off you go. And I actually think that's a subtle piece of functionality which might help people check their emotions a little bit and maybe stop people spreading without thinking.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see what the effect of that is, but it might work.
Yeah, possibly it might be a tiny effect, but who knows? Maybe it'll be one of those things that moves the needle a little. Now, so we've talked about weapons and persuasion and emotions, and a big chunk of the book is about data visualization, and that's obviously my passion. My background is a great deal of what Tableau and the Tableau platform is about.
There is a Cotgreave printed in the book. And talk
there is a
about your
Cotgreave
work,
chart
Andy,
printed
as
in
you will be well aware.
Yes.
I just thought it was a lovely example. Should we talk about that? Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. Do you want to? Well, it's the Iraq bloody toll chart. It's the original of which was done by Simon Scar, and it's data from deaths in Iraq pointing downwards on the screen. So it's a bar chart which points downwards, but it has a peak in the middle. And Simon Scar coloured it red, the colour of blood, and called it Iraq's bloody toll. You cannot look at that without having a gut emotional response about the human tragedy.
It looks like, just to sort of make it more visual for people, it looks like somebody has just taken a knife and scarred the top of the paper, and the blood is then pouring down from that wound. I mean, it is a really, and it won an award. I think
it did win awards.
Justifiably, it's a very, very powerful data visualization. But then you got hold of it.
I got hold of it and thought, well, hang on, bar charts normally go upwards, and what if I made it the dull corporate grey colour, and then suddenly you've got numbers that go up and then numbers that go down to a very low point. I'm like, well, if numbers go up and then they go down to the lowest in the time series, I can actually say deaths on the decline. And so it's literally the same chart, the same bars, just pointed upwards and given a different color, and the story is transformed. And
it's a very striking piece of work, because I noticed you didn't even bother to relabel the axes. You literally flipped it, I think, to make the point that this was so easy. You flipped it, you recolored it, retitled it. So Andy, what was going through your mind when you did that? What point were you trying to explore or to make?
Well, I think I mean, there's a great quote from Kim Reese, who used to run Periscopic, which is a data consultancy in Portland, Oregon, and she said, "Data visualization is a language, a means to convey an opinion or an argument." And that quote has just sat with me. I mean, I think that was back in 2012 or 2013. I'm like, that's so true. And so when I see things like Iraq's bloody toll, it's like, well, it's very obvious Simon Scar has made design decisions to tell a story or to evoke a particular response. So I'm always on the lookout for that. And then see, this was just a great example where I can make two changes, orientation and color, and literally demonstrate a different story. So it comes on to, as we've talked in this little episode about weapons, statistical uses of weapons, and possibly deception when people are using statistics as weapons. But the thing is, there is this other aspect that data visualization is a persuasive medium, right? A chart is as emotive and opinionated as a leader in a newspaper. It's not a piece of reportage. And I think, you touch on that in your chapters on data visualization too, is that, so how do we get that balance between weaponization, deception, and valid persuasion within visualization?
Yeah, I mean, there's no simple answer, because I mean, it could be you could make the same point with any communications medium. You could say, well, look, a speech can be used to inform or to persuade. It can be rabble-rousing. It can be hate speech, or it can be stirring and emotional. How do we get the balance right? Well, I mean, there's so much going on there, right? And it's the same with graphs. But we need to be aware.
Yeah, I think right. So I think the thing that's missing is that generally people realize words are everything you just described. Pictures can do those things, but I think there's a general assumption that charts are, dry and factual, and they tell the story, and they don't do anything. It's numbers, therefore it's truths. And I think what's missing in the general knowledge of people is that no, they are just as flexible in a designer's hands as words are as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, one of the interesting characters. I mean, you're completely right, and I think I make this point, I think, in the chapter, that our defense mechanisms, I think, are less finely attuned. Our intellectual immune system is not as sensitive to
Yeah.
claims made in graphs. We tend to, well, I think Alberto Cairo in his book How Charts Lie points out that we use the words, I see what you mean. So the visual sense is so powerful, we use it as a direct synonym for understanding. But of course, often you see stuff that frankly is not actually there in the data. Or you could present it in a different way, which is why, I found your reworking of Simon's chart to be so interesting, because you have absolutely the same data, really presented in a very direct, very straightforward way, but change the orientation, change the color, change the title, different message. And both messages, by the way, true, perfectly reasonable. One is, this is a disaster, and the other is, this was a disaster, but it's not as bad as it used to be. Both true. Both true.
And thank you for including it in the book. That was
no, it's
nice
my pleasure.
Yeah.
So Florence Nightingale, though, is one of the characters in that in that chapter, who I find very, very interesting. So, Florence Nightingale's charts, incredibly famous. Anyone who's interested in data visualization will know Nightingale's, sometimes called the Rose diagram or the coxcomb diagrams. But I find that the backstory to that fascinating. And one thing I discovered actually in working on the book, which I think highlights the sort of the interest, the complexity of the story around Nightingale. So she is often quoted as receiving an email, a letter from Henry Farr, the statistician with whom she worked. And Henry Farr said, "Oh, you complained that your report would be dry. The drier, the better. Statistics should be the driest of all reading." And Nightingale is often pictured as fighting back against this, the dryness of Farr with these beautiful diagrams. And that is reported in several biographies of Nightingale. But what I found while researching the book is that didn't happen. Nightingale wrote to Farr with that message. So Nightingale said to Farr, statistics should be the driest of all reading. She said to him, the drier the better. And yet she produced these amazingly powerful diagrams. So one of the things I was trying to do is wrestle with what did she mean when she was telling him to be super dry with the statistics, and at the same time, she knew that these diagrams were incredibly vivid, and she planned to send them to people such as Queen Victoria, or to have them framed and hung up in Sandhurst, I think, to influence the military. So that was such an interesting story for me to look into.
I've got a bone. Well, I don't know if it's a bone to pick with you on that, Tim, because I've built whole slides and almost entire presentations around the picture of Farr with that quote looking really dry as he possibly can, and then Nightingale being like, "Ha ha ha! Here's my charts." And I haven't yet got over.
I can tell you how that mistake was made. I think so. I discovered it because I got a biography of Farr, which predated these various biographies of Nightingale that I'd read. I mean, they're good, solid biographies that won awards. Not sloppy work. But the biography of Farr has Nightingale writing to Farr, and I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. So now I'm getting two things from two different sources. And I wrote to the British Library and also to Lynn. I'm trying to remember Lynn MacDonald, who is the editor of the sort of 10-volume complete works of Nightingale. And they both got back to me and they said, actually, the original letter has been lost, but we have a draft. And the draft comes from one of Nightingale's other close colleagues, John Sutherland, I think. And she would often dictate letters to him. So this definitely reflects her views and was sent to Farr. But obviously, because it was slightly obscure in the catalogue of the work and it was unsigned, I think people just naturally assumed that the old beardy guy wrote to the younger woman to tell her not to be so excited about her data. So I think there's some hidden sexism behind that.
Yes, quite possibly. I now have to rework some of my my favorite presentation pieces as a result of that bombshell. So
I'm sorry about that. Well, I had to rewrite the chapter when I discovered it. But there we go. I mean, chapter 10 is all about being willing to adapt and change your mind when you receive new information. But I think one of the points here, though, is important, which is Nightingale was basically trying to separate, and Farr as well. I mean, they saw eye to eye on a lot of things. she's trying to separate the process of analysis from the process of persuasion. So she's basically saying, look, we get our facts absolutely straight. The other thing she said is factor, factor, factor. We need facts. It's fantastic, isn't it? Get the facts straight, understand the situation, make the sort of the analysis as robust as you possibly can. Then when you've done that, start thinking about how to communicate the message.
Yeah,
and her famous rose diagram is, I think, a little bit naughty in some of the choices she makes. It's definitely nudges people towards a particular view that is not fundamentally there in the data. But she was right. She was on the right side. She understood what was going on. And so, I'm willing to give her a pass on that.
Yeah, that's great. It's a really great story. I mean, Tim goes into it in detail in the book, so go check it out there. But there's many other tellings of the Nightingale story. So yeah, it's a great one. And the news about Far, still processing it. So that's okay. I've got a couple more questions. Obviously, 2020 has been a year to remember. And not only have we got a pandemic, we've got elections, we've got Brexit here in this country. To what extent do you feel optimistic that the message of the book, will push through the tidal wave of rapid response partisanship? Wow, that's a big question.
Well, I mean, here in the UK, it's definitely broken through, partly because more or less my radio program on Radio 4, I think became, and I probably misperceive how important it was because, we're all the stars of our own story, right? But it moved to a more prominent slot and repeated a lot. And I think people really came to rely on More or Less as an important source of deeper analysis of the numbers around COVID. And I say this without being self-aggrandizing because all the good stuff was done by my amazing producer and the team of researchers on More or Less. So that really helped, I think, the book to break through because people had suddenly grown used to the idea that numbers weren't just about winning arguments. There was this, the virus doesn't care whether you win the argument or not. The virus has no opinions about you whatsoever. We just need to understand. So I think in the UK, it has helped make my point. I mean, it's a heck of a way to be proved right. But one of the things I found was, so I've finished the draft of this book. I'm about to send it to the publishers in March. And the argument I'm making, the fundamental argument I'm making is, look, statistics are not just about misinformation and political communication. Statistics are about understanding the world, and they can be matters of life or death. And then we hit lockdown. And I write to my publishers and say, I might need a few more weeks with this. And actually, it didn't take long to rewrite the book because it was simply a case of going through all the different points, the different rules of thumb I have in the book, and saying, well, COVID-19 gives us a really good example of this. Coronavirus gives us another really good example of this. And it just underlined everything I was trying to say. So, I mean, it's not much of a consolation, but I think the virus has made the point very effectively.
Yeah, I think so.
That there's an enormous value to gathering data and to analyzing it. And I mean, there's so much we want to know. I mean, you think about this enormous effort, data gathering effort that we've had to figure out what is the virus? How does it spread? How dangerous is it? Who is most at risk? Where does it spread? What sort of practices are most likely to spread it or to prevent the spread? What are the effective treatments? Can we rely on a vaccine? Is it safe? I mean, these are hugely important questions. There's been this enormous data gathering effort to try to answer those questions, which there's no way we could answer them in any other way. No. And what I want people to think about is that actually that sort of data gathering effort, less frenetically, less desperately, goes on all the time. The statisticians are all, whether we're talking about business analysts or we're talking about official statistics, statisticians are constantly trying to understand what's going on. They're gathering the data, they're analyzing it to help all of us understand the world, hold governments to account, and make better decisions. And we don't see it, we take it for granted. We think of it as a bit of a joke. We view it with cynicism. We assume the numbers will always be there when we want them. And we only notice when things go wrong. So I want people to be a little bit more grateful and just notice this amazing effort that is constantly being performed around them. And the virus, I think, has really underlined that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been amazed at the parallels between what I see in the business world as well as people go through all the 10 rules I see in businesses all the time. So in a moment, we'll come on to what you're reading, because we like to get that information from our guests. But the last question around the book is, you've got 10 rules. If 10 rules is too much to digest, and I hope it isn't, you know, what do you want? What's the one thing people should do?
Well, we've got the golden rule. We've got the golden rule at the end of the book. So, and it underpins all the others. And the golden rule is to be curious. And what I mean by that is to be willing to go deeper, to not be dismissing things or accepting things in a knee-jerk fashion, to try to look at the human stories behind the statistics, to try to understand what was the process that brought these statistics to my attention, and should that process win my admiration or my suspicion? And just to be open-minded and interested in understanding the world rather than interested in winning some kind of argument. And if you approach the problems of the world, you approach the problems of data in this open-minded spirit of curiosity, I don't think you'll go too far wrong.
Perfect. Right. So in a moment, we will find out what you're reading. But before we move on to that, this is Tim's book. It's out now in the UK. It's The Data Detective, if you're based in the US and some other international territories.
Canada, Guam, yes.
Canada, Guam, it's Data Detective. Canada and Guam, not Canada, Guam. I really enjoyed it. I think, you know, it's good. It's something anybody working in business should read, but general public as well, because everything we've talked about in the last half hour are definitely lessons that we could all benefit from. So thanks for that section, Tim.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And now we also like to know, what is our guest? What's on top of our guests and on top of my mind by what we're reading, watching, or listening to? So in this episode, the thing that I've seen that I really loved and wanted people to go check out is a jetpack.ai website, but that's the name of the site. It's a data visualization of noise pollution in Brussels. All right, now, great, a data visualization of noise pollution in Brussels. But when you go and click on this, and the link will be below, turn your speakers on, because it's also driven by sound as well. And as you hover over the little bits of Brussels, the color gets more intense the louder that part of the city is, but the sound also represents the city sounds that are in that place as well. And I got lost for about 5 minutes on this thing. Without the sound, I probably would have looked at it and gone, color map of the city of Brussels, but the sound just added a really interesting extra dimension. So I don't know if you've seen that, Tim, but I know you've talked about data, audio, data, sound, sonification before.
Sonification, sonification. It's hard to do, but sometimes works so well. That sounds cool.
Yeah. So everyone check that out. And Tim, what's on your bookshelf or in your DVD player? That's a bit old school, isn't it? What's on your mind at the moment?
So, what games are on my mind? I'm like you, I think, Andy. I seem to remember seeing your bookshelf with your collection of board games. I'm a gamer. I like tabletop role-playing games, and I like board games. So I've used that as an excuse, because I'm one of my other projects is I present a podcast called Cautionary Tales, which is all about things going wrong and what we can learn from them. And I've been reading 2 books about the history of games in an effort to try to tell an interesting story about the history of games. So one of the books is The Monopolists by Mary Pillen, which is a history of Monopoly. And the other is John Peterson's book, Playing at the World, which is an absolutely enormous book, which offers a detailed history of Dungeons and Dragons. And there are one of the things that interests me about both of these games is what they tell us about human creativity, who invents and who has permission to invent and who gets the credit. And it's not always the person who should get the credit. And so both of those books are great, but if you don't want to read the books, you can always subscribe to Cautionary Tales, and I'll be telling those stories sometime in the new year.
Nice, nice. Oh, well, I'll be digging out those books because the story of Monopoly is fascinating because it was invented by a woman whose name I forget, but then
Lizzie
kind of,
McGee. Lizzie McGee. Yes,
yeah,
very interesting story.
but she didn't get the lion's share of the cash for it, did she?
She got $500, and Charles Darrow became the first board game millionaire. And Charles Darrow's main contribution to Monopoly is having the unique and original idea of telling everybody that he invented Monopoly. That's pretty much all he did.
That's so bad. I am a board gamer, so I'm going to sneak in another question. What game has been hitting the table the most during lockdown in the Harford household?
Yeah. So actually, we played around a pandemic with my wife and 9-year-old son last night. We had fun, even on the easy setting. It's surprisingly difficult. My teenage daughters refused to play Pandemic in a pandemic. They view it as tasteless. The other thing, I've been playing a lot of stuff on Board Game Arena, Dominion.games. It's a lot of online tabletop gaming, and Dominion is kind of addicted to Dominion at the moment. What about you?
Well, yeah, I've done a lot of Pandemic, but that was pre-pandemic. That's a cooperative board game, should anybody want to check that out. But mostly it's been Wingspan, just a joyful game about creating an aviary of birds and scoring more points than your contestants can.
So cute.
It is. Have you played it?
I haven't. Sounds wonderful.
Oh, it's absolutely marvelous. It's just a breath of fresh air. It's competitive, but it's still like, oh, we're looking at beautiful. It's beautiful. So Wingspan, I recommend. All right. We'd better wrap this up, Tim. I could talk about board games for about another 3 hours, but
yeah, we've gone full nerd, haven't we?
Oh yes, and that's what we like in the show. So Tim, thank you so much for joining us on If Data Could Talk. Everybody, do go and check out Tim's book and Cautionary Tales. And with that, it is the end of our show. So Tim, thanks very much to everybody else.
Andy. It's been great.
Thank you. And to everybody else, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, wherever you are. And we'll see you next time on If Data Could Talk. Bye-bye.